Namaste. Welcome to our 85th talk on the Bhagavad Gita. We are rapidly approaching the end of the Gita and his great summation. Once again, in this section of the Gita, there's discussion about various aspects of life according to their guna, their quality. What is sattva? What is rajas? What is tamas? So, the 23rd verse. Action which is ordained and free from attachment, done without attraction or aversion, with no desire to obtain the fruit, that action is said to be sattvic. First, what is ordained? It has two meanings. One is ordained by the scriptures, especially what we call the Dharma Shastra. There's a whole body of scriptures that teach the duties of various people according to their position in society. They're very, very important. Often people will write to me through the time and they'll say, I'm a grahasta and I'd like to know then what is the way of the grahasta and the ideals. Well, it's a laudable interest. But if I was to really tell them what the Dharma Shastras say, they would indignantly refuse to do it. Because you cannot imagine how specialized it is and how rigorous it is in the Dharma Shastra. And I'm sorry to say, not a great number of people in India are even following it. All right, back to from that. That which is ordained, okay, by the scriptures, but it means also just by good sense, by your own good sense. That's what you know to be intelligent, that which you know to be beneficial, that which you know to be the right thing for good conduct, and also which in general is known the thing to be good, such as indeed charity and interest in the welfare of the people around you and so on. So it can be ordained by a great high authority, such as the scripture, or just by conscience, what we know we ought to do, even though we could talk our way out of it and perhaps fool people into accepting our non-action, but in our hearts we'll know what's the thing that should be done. So action which is ordained and free from attachment. It isn't like, I got to do it, I want to do it, I want to do it, or I have to do it, or I'll go to hell if I don't do it, or et cetera, et cetera. No, there's no personal self-interest. And there's no selfish idea of gain. Obviously, when you do something correctly, you make good karma. Well, that's a gain to you. And you'd be silly if you if you didn't want that to be. But this is, again, ego coming in or not coming in. Done without attraction or aversion. In other words, we don't do it because, oh, I like it, and I just feel better about myself if I do it. Or, oh, I don't because I couldn't stand that. And, oh, and then they're even at yes, and even saying, oh, I feel terrible about myself. Because sometimes, for example, if someone is close to you and you really do care about them, you have to sometimes speak very straightforwardly. And you have to explain if there's something that is in the life incorrect, something lacking. And you have to say, listen, 1, 2, 3, 4, you've got to change that or you've got to stop that. And that can be very difficult, especially if we know we're going to speak to people who won't listen to us and will be hostile. But still, it does have to be done. with no desire to obtain the fruit. Now, obviously, we don't do anything. You don't go to work without the desire to get paid. But it means in the sense of a selfish um, attitude, especially, I want to get something for nothing. People do a lot of things to sort of work a kind of scam of various sorts, and that's wrong. And also exclusively just wanting the fruit of it. That's the only reason. No, you do it because it's the right thing. Because it's the right thing, you'll have positive karma and it will benefit you. But your root cause is just to do the right. No soldier wants to be killed. And yet the soldier goes into battle because it's the right thing for the soldier to do. That action is sattvic. When it has what you might call purity of intention. Excuse me, I've got to take my magic red marker so I can make a note that I make a note that I've talked about this verse. I hope I wouldn't forget I had it, and I hope you won't forget what I had to say. But anyway, all right. Next. But that action done with desire for the fulfillment of desires, with self centeredness, or furthermore is done with much effort, is considered Rajasic. In other words, you do it, and the only aim is nothing better, no betterment to it, but just to get what I want. And thinking of myself, this is what will benefit me. No thought, well, how will this affect other people? Maybe even my own family? No. After all, it's my life. Or furthermore, is done with much effort. In other words, far more than is good sense. Like people who pay more money than something is worth and could do it consistently. Well, we consider them foolish. And it can't be done without just virtually exhausting yourself or overdoing it. Uh, then that is Rajasic and is ultimately a binding type of action. That action which is undertaken because of delusion, because you mistakenly think it's the right thing, or you mistakenly think it's your duty. There are a lot of people who do very wrong things because they think that they truly do because their mirror is bent and they reflect the world incorrectly. They think, well, that's what I ought to do. After all, he wronged me. I ought to give him a good shove right back. That's an example of delusional action without regard to the consequences of loss, injury, or one's own ability. To realize this could hurt me, this could kill me. As I've cited before, uh, when the American newsman interviewed these extremely unintelligent young men in in the Middle East when there was some big conflict which the newsman was covering, and these young men they weren't soldiers, you understand, but they were exposing themselves to great danger just from heedlessness. And when he actually said, uh, but don't you realize by being in this area and so on, by the way, there were minefields and everything, you could be killed. And this one said, why? 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 It was. I was impressed. I'll say it was. It may have been Tamasic, but it sure was impressive. Uh, So without even good sense or not caring, I don't care, away I go, crash. Or even your own ability to try to do something beyond you is ignorant and is harmful and can be destructive. I remember very well the contempt I encountered. I was 9 years old. I went to church camp, and some kind of a stunt thing was going to be done. And I was never good at things like that. So I was supposedly in the group, and this was going to do it. And so this one man actually was from my own home church. He said, "Well, we'll do this, 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 this." I said, well, what if you can't? And he looked at me like, "Oh, you worm, you dog. What do you mean you can't?" And I wasn't being, unreasonable. But you see this negative kind of attitude. I know a very brilliant attorney, and he was once discussing a case that was very important with this man. I can't think what the man had to do with it. But the man said, "Oh, well, it'll be a good chance for enhancing your reputation. It'll certainly get in the news and so on." And my friend said, "Well, I don't plan to present the case itself in court. I'm much better doing research, but I'm not particularly good in standing up before the judge and making a case." And the man looked at him like, "Oh, you despicable idiot." In other words, knowing your weakness, knowing your limitations, egotists think that that's utterly crazy. And even if they want to be noble, irresponsible. So, uh, this is the way of the Tamasic. But we're not. So he's talked about the action. Now he's going to talk about the actor, the doer, the character of the person himself. A doer free from attachment, non egoistic, endowed with steadfastness and resolution, and unaffected by success or failure, just knowing I did what was right and I did my best and I did it in the right way, is said to be sattvic. Well, I don't need a lot of comment on that, do we? In other words, a person who's altruistic, a doer that is passionate, that means all stirred up with emotion, desiring to obtain actions fruits, greedy. In other words, not doing it because, well, yes, this is good and this acquisition, is enhancing. It's just like I want, and I want more. Violent natured. In other words, a person who can be hostile, who can be unfairly aggressive, impure, ashud. In other words, not moral, easily elated or ejected. The mood swingers, up high, down low, never seem to have a middle ground. It's always, oh, everything is just fine, or, oh, well, yeah. So we all know them. Is declared to be Rajasic. So, an agent. Now, this means a means of doing something. We all say someone is an intelligent agent. In other words, we think that's a person. Usually, it often does, a representative, a person who has a certain official position. But this doesn't mean it that way. This means the whole approach, the whole even strategy of something that is unsteady. It's not sure. It's so tentative that it's virtually hopeless. Vulgar, and it was expresses a low mentality. Obstinate is something that is done and is just a character of stubbornness. False, dishonest, lazy, it's an expression of laziness, despondent and procrastinating. In other words, it's action that comes from being all down and discouraged, and again, despondent, or always hesitating, not acting. There are some people that you can't get them to say the truth as a rule. And sometimes there are people you can't get them to say anything as a rule, not because they're modest or not because they're even shy. It's because they will not do anything that just may have a result. I mean, I don't think most of us will understand that kind of person, but they are. Uh, I, I love Sri Ramakrishna's simile. You know, Sri Ramakrishna just did not hesitate to use any kind of example from ordinary life. I remember, you know, there's a organization called Ramakrishna Mission, which was started by monastic disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. And they worship Sri Ramakrishna literally. They consider him an incarnation of God, and they're continually sort of invoking his memory or saying as an example. But I remember I mentioned a couple of things he said that I felt were quite wonderful. They were right to the point, but it had to do kind of like with daily life of people. And he said, I don't know why he had to use those kind of unsavory examples. I mean, Sri Ramakrishna, he said he believed was God, but he himself was far more genteel than Sri Ramakrishna. So Sri Ramakrishna said, there are people that if you ask them to urinate in a particular spot, they'll refuse to do it because they're terrified that you might gain some benefit from it. I have known people like that. Not a lot, I'm glad to say. And nobody right now that I have any association with because I have enough sense to not associate with them anymore. But there are people like that. They're terrified that they may benefit someone. I knew some people that when they went downtown and there were the parking meter, I have been with people that there'd be 20 minutes left on the parking meter, but their shopping was done and they should go. But because if they pulled out of that space, somebody else came in and would get 20 minutes free, they would sit there. No exaggeration. I sorry to say I've gone through this about 3 or 4 times. We sit there for 20 minutes. And when it went click and the red thing came up, then we left. Now, there's an expression which is actually very unfair to dogs, but still, it conveys a meaning. Dog selfish. Can you imagine being so selfish, which also is greediness, that you are afraid that somebody might even get 5 minutes that you paid for? And yet there are these kind of people. I knew these people very well. I associated with them very, very frequently. So, okay. We've we've really come to that end of that point. So maybe I should do something interesting. Instead of uh, going over and apologizing, I'm going to go under unless, let's see, if I look, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 20, 20 minutes. So I made it. A record has been set. So, namaste, namaste, more to come. I hope.